I'm Zen, and this is JoJo, and welcome back to another OCCOJ episode on character development. We've made it past 11,000 subscribers! Damn! Thank you guys, we're glad to have you here. Hello newbies! A story needs conflict. It could be in the form of horrible events that transpire out of anyone's control, like a terrible storm that destroys everything in its path, or in the form of a person, persons, or organization that the protagonist is working against. Villains are often used as the main source of conflict. They have ideals that are usually selfish and generally considered bad or even evil by the audience. They're an important part of the plot, and should be as thoroughly developed as the protagonist. Failure to do so could mean having a really boring, predictable villain, or the conflict they create seem trivial or silly. I want to rule the world! What would you do with the world? I don't know. World domination is evil, and I'm evil, so... Yeah, okay, I'm out of this. I'd like to talk about two villains today, each showcasing a different angle of villainy. One character is more typical in their villainy, in that they're an all-around bad guy. We don't feel sorry for them, and their actions are entirely selfish. The other is a character who touches our hearts in a way, but someone who couldn't stay alive if we wanted our hero to survive. These characters are Judge Claude Frollo from the 1996 Disney animated film version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and X-49 from Samurai Jack. Whenever I'm browsing online forums and the question, "Who is your favorite villain?" is asked, I've noticed that there's usually at least one person, other than myself, who mentions the insane, self-righteous, pious Judge Claude Frollo. And if you ever see those top 5, top 10, etc. Disney villain videos, he's almost always on the list, if not at the top of it. Can we just take a moment to talk about what is probably the most messed up murder in Disney history? People usually mention Mufasa's death as the most cruel. It's awful, but at least when he dies, his son is able-bodied and he can get away, and Mufasa is able to watch Simba succeed from the heavens. So it kinda has a happy ending. But man, Frollo. Instead of just letting Quasi and his mother go and saying, screw it, they'll probably freeze to death in the snow, he decides to hunt both of them down on horseback. Quasi's mother desperately tries to outrun his horse while carrying an infant child. Frollo finally catches up, grabs a hold of her baby, and snatches him from her by kicking her in the face, hard enough that she loses her grip on him, her last memory being that Frollo has and will probably kill her baby as she falls backwards, breaking her neck on the concrete steps of a church. Can we fit more evil into one murder? Well, yes, Frollo could then dump the baby Quasi into a well. But the Archdeacon intervenes and guilt trips Frollo into taking care of Quasi to redeem himself for the sin that he committed. Frollo raises Quasimodo, manipulating him to believe that he, Frollo, Mr. Mommy Murder Man who nearly killed you, is his only friend. Esmeralda, who is an object of Frollo's desire, is also under his control. He struggles with his desires for her because it's a sin to his religion and she's seen as a dirty gypsy, a class way under a respected, pious man. His word means a lot more to the public than hers does, and he uses this to his advantage. He wants to, marry or bang Esmeralda, but the feeling isn't mutual. She's flirted with him previously, but that's always been part of her dancing performance. Honey, I know you're trying to make money, but you shouldn't manipulate people's emotions like that. That's kind of a dick move. It confuses people into thinking you like them in a way that you don't, and invites potentially unwanted attention. Get involved in a craft or something. You have a really smart goat. Use it. But regardless, she doesn't deserve the kind of shit Frollo puts her through. At one point, he's holding her arms behind her back and smelling her hair, insinuating that he'd like to hang and or bang her. Then he attempts to burn her alive because she refuses to succumb to his desires. Yeah, there's nothing redeemable about him. His death is pretty well deserved and satisfying. What makes Frollo such a memorable, twisted character is that he's the most terrible side of the human condition manifested through his lust, manipulation, and sadism. There's nary a force more terrifying than a person whom many trust and see in high regard taking advantage of others. As awesome as Frollo is, a villain doesn't always have to be rotten to the core. Sometimes we may even sympathize with them. When I think of a villain who isn't necessarily evil, I think of X-49 from Samurai Jack. He is a murder robot that was made for and worked for OCCOJ. For unknown reasons, the scientists thought it would be a swell idea to implant an experimental chip into him that would simulate human emotions. What could go wrong? Well, nothing actually goes wrong. Not for the world anyway, but for X-49 it's a bit of a different story. X-49 did have a sense of right and wrong, and even felt bad for what he did at times. But regardless, he continued his work as a hitman and even became the best robot to do it. That all changed when he met Lulu. Sweet thing. He quit his work in order to live a peaceful life enjoying music with her. But then OCCOJ kidnaps her, who promises to give her back only if he assassinates our hero, Samurai Jack. Within 17 minutes, we're introduced to X-49, told of his struggle, and watch him die by Jack's hand. Before X-49 dies, he mutters, "Lulu, take care of Lulu." Jack definitely looks like he understands. Understands that just like himself, X-49 had goals and hopes, and someone who relied on him to pull through for them. We're never given any closure on Lulu's fate. Her rescue is a bittersweet failure. Is it okay for X-49 to murder a man who is trying to save, the world for one pug? When you think about it, it isn't. It's selfish. That's why he's the villain. And he's murdered countless others under the command of OCCOJ. But he does touch that little part in us, that selfish part, which may sacrifice the well-being of everyone else in order to save a loved one. Even though we want our faux Asian hero to win, we're given that rare moment where the villain isn't a cut-and-dry bad guy. Ultimately, we want to see him fail, but we feel pretty damn bad about it. I'd also like to take a moment to mention two other villains who fall into a very interesting archetype. Every once in a while, we'll get villains who have good intentions, but whose method of achieving them are inhumane and sadistic. Amon, from the Legend of Korra, wants equality between all people. Understandable. But his way of doing that is robbing people of their bending abilities. Richmond Valentine, from Kingsman, wants to save the human race from extinction. Good, right? Well, not when he wants to cull the human race by providing SIM cards that drive people to kill each other. So what kind of villain is good for your story, and how do you go about making them? To address the first question, think about: what is the main conflict that your protagonist has to face? What can your villain do to contribute to that conflict if they aren't the conflict themselves? What opportunities should your villain give the protagonist to grow as a person, or, maybe in depressing cases, what weaknesses does the villain hone in on that bring your protagonist down? What does your villain gain by opposing the protagonist? You should think deeply about this to avoid the whole villain for the sake of being a villain trope. Unless, maybe you're writing them for a self-aware fairy tale or something. How should the audience feel about your villain and what they're doing? The audience has the ability to learn things about your villain that other characters may never know. Knowing the full extent of the villain's intentions, actions, and the thought process behind what they're doing, does the audience to any degree agree with them? Or sympathize with them? Like Richmond, Amon, or X-49? Or, like in Frollo's case, does the audience feel none of that? After taking all these questions into consideration and answering as many as you can of them, you should be able to start to compile a list of goals and traits that your villain has, but also goals you have for your villain in terms of what happens to them. There's so many ways to make a good villain, but a good villain will always break your heart in one way or another. Thank you guys for watching. If you're interested in Fleshport and you haven't taken a look at the Zentian Games YouTube channel, feel free to swing on by. There's a new video, and more soon. We'll see you next time. Bye!